Shadow Slave. Chapter 2246, Children of War. Far below, on the ground, Sunny was slowly losing the struggle against Anvil. The tip of the bloodied sword was already pressed against his neck, piercing the skin. The blood was slowly flowing up the blade, trying to return to its source. However, his trembling hand was too mangled to contain it. His grip was still crushing, though, preventing the cursed sword from moving any further. In that moment, tormented by desperation and pain, Sunny suddenly saw it clearly, the will, and the way the King of Swords wielded it. The vague shape of the path to supremacy. Disjointed pieces of knowledge and the things he had observed all came together, falling into place. And suddenly, it all made sense. His eyes narrowed. It all made sense, but Sunny still did not know what he had to do. What he gained was not a map, but rather all the necessary tools he needed to draw the map, and then chart a course to his destinations across it. If only he had time. But there was no time. He was going to be killed in mere seconds. Sunny gritted his teeth, desperate and refusing to give up. No, no, no. And just then, a miracle happened. Far above, the clouds of Godgrave parted, and rays of annihilating light poured down from the white abyss of the incandescent sky. The fragment of the shadow realm endured them with cold indifference, remaining as dark and lightless as it had always been. But Sunny and Anvil were currently devoid of its protection. Sensing the clouds breaking above them, the King of Swords looked down at Sunny with cold contempt and pushed her sword forward with tyrannical force. He must have hoped to finish the job before the light reached them, but Sunny refused to be killed. The sword did not move. However, the annihilating light did not reach them, either. High in the sky, the storm of rustling swords shifted, and both of them were suddenly drowned in shadows. Shifting his gaze up, Sunny saw the flying swords forming a vast, impenetrable shield above them. The enchanted blades were pressed tightly against each other, so that no gap was left between them, and therefore, no light reached the ground below. Of course, the sky of Godgrave was not forgiving enough to be stopped by a barrier of mere steel, enchanted or not. Already, there were aisles of angry red glow spreading across the surface of the celestial shield. Glowing drops fell down, and soon, molten metal rained from the sky. The swords were being annihilated, but there were so many of them that, for now, the barrier held. It was not going to last long, though. Sunny lowered his gaze and looked at Anvil, feeling the cursed blade scrape against the bones of his hand and sink deeper into his neck. He was drawing the map feverishly. And then, he saw it. He finally understood how to attain supremacy. Far above, Nephis was drifting in the harrowing white abyss of the godless sky. There was no wind here, no hope, and no salvation. Only silence and blinding radiance that went beyond fire, beyond light, beyond heat. That radiance was destruction incarnate. It was destruction itself, a force from before time existed that was capable of erasing entire worlds from existence. Of erasing existence itself. No epsilon s. Nephis was burning. Her body was made of flame, but even that flame was being destroyed. Her soul was turning to ash, and the ashes of her soul were turning into nothingness. There, in that merciless white abyss, Nephis lost her body, her mind, her soul. Her very self was stripped bare and cleansed of everything, until nothing but her naked spirit remained. Her spirit began to crumble, as well. But she still had the will. Her will had been born from pain, from flame, from conviction, from longing, and so, she willed herself into existence. She willed herself to be reborn from the fire, to be blessed by the fire. She spoke the true name of destruction, warding herself from being destroyed. Even as Nephis burned, she healed herself, and burned again. Maintaining a tenuous state of equilibrium, neither dead nor alive, she continued to exist, for now. She knew that she would not be able to prevent herself from dissolving into white radiance with her sheer will for long. Her will was not inexhaustible, after all. It was not absolute. But in that moment between life and death, Nephis finally saw the path to supremacy. She knew what she had to do, and what her will had to become. I have to survive. I have to die. That was his answer. It was so simple, but Sunny had remained blind to it for so long. Anvil's blade sank deeper into his neck. Molten metal rained from the sky, and far above, the barrier of swords was falling apart. Rays of light were already falling on the surface of the ancient bone. Sunny had to die, but he could not allow himself to be killed. There was a trick to it all, at least there was for him. He was going to cheat his way to supremacy. That was his act of defiance. Still, death was cruel and terrifying, even for someone who had died as many times as Sunny had. He had cheated death on plenty of occasions, always finding a way to stay alive. But this time was different. It had to be. This time, he had to die in earnest, with no deception or trickery involved, only truth. It was so absurd that he wanted to laugh. He would have, if not for the few centimeters of cold steel currently piercing his neck. Still, Sunny smiled crookedly behind Weaver's mask. He opened his mouth and asked in a hoarse voice, straining to make himself heard. "Hey, King of Swords, do you wish to kill me?" Anvil looked at him coldly. "I do. I will." Sunny couldn't help it, after all, and let out a stifled, sinister laugh. The cursed blade cut him, and he grimaced. A dark, murderous fury rose like a pyre in his heart. Sunny spat. "Listen, you wretch, you can't kill me. You are not worthy enough to kill me." He mustered what little remained of his strength, arduously pushing Anvil's sword a few centimeters back for a moment. "A man worthy of killing me has not been born in this world, yet." Kneeling, bleeding, utterly broken, Sunny looked up at Anvil and laughed again. "And never will be. I am the heir of death, you fool. Did you really think that you could kill death? The only thing that could kill death was death itself." As brilliant light illuminated them, forcing Anvil to freeze, Sunny raised Serpent with his free hand. The black odachi rippled, turning into a ghostly stiletto. And just as his arm started to crumble into ash, Sunny grinned, turned the blade of the stiletto against himself, and plunged it into his own heart. Chapter 2247, Throne of Shadows. Sunny had to die, but he could not allow himself to be killed. He had to be the one to end his own life. That was easier said than done, though. After all, he excelled at staying alive against all odds. His soul was vast and tenacious, while his body was like a fortress. He could endure an incredible amount of punishment and heal at breathtaking speed. Even if his heart stopped beating for some reason, there was a good chance that he could survive by simply forcing his blood to move on its own. That was why Sunny had pierced his chest with the dark stiletto, with Serpent. With the slaying blade that embodied death itself. His eyes widened as the cold blade pierced his heart. That coldness spread in an instant, permeating his entire being, pulling him down and slowing down his thoughts. It was cruelly painful, but the pain was overshadowed by the terrifying realization of what he had done. He felt it. Death coming to claim what used to be a person, what used to be him. He felt his body growing weak, his soul collapsing, his vision turning dark. This was the end, and there was no escape from that end. No trick he could use, no clever strategy that could save him. The finality of it all, the eternal nothingness that lay in front of him, terrified Sunny at the last moment. At least death was swift and merciful. He did not even feel the agony of being burned alive by the blinding light, just saw his arms crumbling into ash, as if observing someone else ceasing to exist from a distance. The last breath escaped from his lips, which grew forever silent. The kneeling figure of the Lord of Shadows swayed, and then fell. However, his body never touched the ground, turning into a cloud of ash before it could. The ash was scattered by the wind. The last thing to crumble was the hand that still clung to Anvil's blade, stubbornly refusing to let go until the final moment. Soon, all that remained of the fearsome Lord of Shadows was the black mask that fell to the ground and lay there, forlorn, staring at the sky with empty dark eyes. And his shadow. There was a still, silent lake that bathed in the darkness of 7 lightless suns. A great temple of black marble towered above the dark water, full of emptiness. A legion of silent shadows surrounded the temple, standing on the surface of the still lake without motion, their lifeless gazes turned to the ancient edifice of the temple. As if waiting for something. Nothing disturbed the tranquil silence of the dark lake, until, suddenly, a cold wind blew above its surface. The still water rippled. Then, without warning, a bolt of black lightning tore the peaceful darkness apart, falling from above to strike the magnificent temple. It passed through the tiles of its roof, unobstructed, and disappeared inside. And by the time the black flames retreated, a new shadow stood alone in the impenetrable darkness of the empty great hall. It was the shadow of a slender young man, his beautiful features still and unmoving. His eyes were closed. As the cold winds raged above the surging lake and the 7 suns burned with dark flames above it, the young man remained silent and motionless, just like the legion of shadows outside. Raos. But then, his eyelids trembled. As the young man slowly opened his tenebrous eyes, it was as if a wave of invisible force spread outward from the temple, passing through the silent shadows and making the vast lake surge. The 7 lightless suns ignited with a dark radiance, and the still waters boiled. Something was happening to the black suns, to the dark lake, to the vast expanse of lightless silence itself. As if it was undergoing a profound metamorphosis, reaching unfathomable depths. The shadow of the young man seemed to break the chains that had kept it motionless, moving slightly, coming alive. He looked around slowly, gaining awareness, then inhaled deeply. Then, he walked across the great hall of the dark temple, and passed through its gates. Standing atop the steps of black marble, the stunning young man looked down at the legion shadows with his dark, cold, lightless eyes. And answering to his presence, the shadows, which had always been lifeless and motionless, finally moved. Those who possessed forms that resembled humans knelt. Those who possessed forms that resembled beasts lowered themselves to the surface of the water. All of them prostrated themselves before the young man, as if welcoming their lord, their monarch, their sovereign. The young man looked down at them, his face emotionless and cold. Then, a sinister smile twisted his alluring lips. It worked. Sunny wanted to laugh. He had done it. He had died, and returned from death. This time, without the help of powerful memories or the endlessly flowing waters of the great river. He had defeated death with nothing but his will. Which was to say, he had defied an absolute law, and galvanized his soul into becoming supreme in the process. Of course, there was a little trick involved. If Sunny had been killed, his shadow would have been sent to the shadow realm, and there, it would have been turned into pure essence by the world, thus erasing him from existence. But shadows of those creatures that Sunny himself killed never entered the realm of death. They entered his own soul sea instead, and joined the ranks of all his previous victims. So, by killing himself, Sunny had sent his shadow into his own soul sea. That was why he had to die by his own hand, and not by Anvil's blade, and that was how he had been able to will himself into coming back to life instead of being consumed by the shadow realm. When he did, the wall that prevented him from attaining supremacy was broken. And his nascent domain manifested itself into existence. Looking at the legion of prostrating shadows, Sunny exhaled slowly. So this is what Uri's meant. These silent shadows. They were his domain. He had been building it all along without even knowing it. And what a powerful domain it was. His sinister smile turned dark and murderous. Now, then, Sunny looked up. There was someone out there he had to kill. Back on the fractured battlefield, the fearsome black mask trembled. Chapter 2248, Throne of Light. High in the godless sky of Godgrave, Nephis was being reforged. The brilliant white abyss was her anvil, and her will was the hammer with which she forged her soul into shape. The pain was the pristine flame that kept her soul pure. Burning, restoring herself, and burning again. Being destroyed, being created, and then destroyed again. Destruction, creation, it was one and the same. For Nephis, they were two sides of the same coin. Her flames could both heal and burn, after all, so she was not foreign to the concept. Her soul was being reshaped, but it was her will, her spirit, that ended up being tempered with each excruciating rebirth. Until her soul and her will permeated each other and became too interwoven to be separated, let alone discerned. At that moment, Nephis felt a profound change happen to her. It was as if an incandescent spark of a beautiful golden hue had ignited in the blinding radiance of her fiery soul, making the immolating white flames seem dim in comparison. That spark was a catalyst. But it was not a catalyst for her soul becoming supreme. Instead, it was a catalyst that ignited her nascent domain, making it swell with heat, with light, with life. The fragile, ethereal connections she had established to numerous people who had been inspired by her suddenly shone with a beautiful radiance, and the radiance spread through the vast web of them, chasing away the encroaching darkness. Her source element underwent a change, as well. No, not quite. It remained the same, however. It was as if the floodgates that prevented Nephis from experiencing it fully had been opened, and the shallow trickle of essence she had been receiving before turned full and powerful like a freely flowing river. The dam had been broken. Each of the countless people whose souls had been ignited by the flames of longing was a source of this radiant spirit essence, and as the spirit essence flowed into Nephis, her own essence was galvanized by it, undergoing a qualitative transformation, making her supreme. Nephis felt her essence changing, becoming brighter, richer, vastly more potent, brimming with ferocious, unimaginable power. Her soul cores rebuilt themselves, becoming deeper and stronger in order to contain that startling power. Her soul sea changed, as well. The copy of the ivory island there had been lifeless and still before, like a frozen replica, but now, it suddenly seemed much more real. The blades of emerald grass swayed in the wind, glistening with dew. The leaves of the ancient trees rustled peacefully. Rayobes. The waters of the clear lake rippled as they shone beautifully, reflecting the sunlight. And that was not all. The Tower of Hope was not the only landmark in her soul sea anymore. Some distance away, a great castle of white stone towered above the resplendent water. A magnificent black palace was there, as well. A gargantuan ship drifted on the calm waves, its numerous sails full of wind. There were other citadels, as well. All of them rose from the water like islands, and the vast expanse of her radiant soul was not empty anymore. Instead, it resembled a small world. Nephis survived. She had survived the incandescent heaven of the sun god's fallen realm, and therefore, defied both the absolute law of death and the laws governing this broken world. She became a supreme. Her domain was now truly manifested, as well, and it was both vast and splendid. 4 great citadels were empowering it. Dozens of other citadels belonged to her domain now, too. That was because the saints who ruled them had lost their faith in the sovereigns, but had faith in Nephis instead. Even those like Saitian had been swayed, choosing her over the supremes that had failed them. Dozens of saints, thousands of masters, hundreds of thousands of awakened, and numerous mundane humans believed in her, too. Their souls were a part of her domain, shining like a myriad of stars in the radiant sky. After all, Nephis had spent a decade building upon the legend of her clan with Cassie's help, to create a myth of her own. Now, across the 2 worlds, countless people were inspired by Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan, their souls burning with yearning. Countless people believed in the famous propaganda slogan invented by the government. As long as Immortal Flame burned, humanity would not be extinguished. So, it was as if the Immortal Flame clan, and its last daughter, had become synonymous with humanity. And therefore, most of humanity was a part of her domain. Nephis could feel all of them, too. The connection she shared with those who had been inspired by her was much deeper now, and more universal. It did not depend on distance or proximity anymore, and so, there was a boundless ocean of hopes and desires that washed over her mind, threatening to overwhelm her. Nephis silenced it, for now, or at least tried to. There would be time to explore this connection later. For now, she had to finish the battle. Boundless power, endless essence. Full of furious light, Nephis cast her flaming gaze to the ground. Far below, on the ground, the great armies were melting in the flood of nightmare creatures. The sudden snowstorm summoned by the Lord of Shadows had stemmed the tide of abominations, somewhat, and the terrifying explosion caused by Changing Star diminished their swelling number even further. But people were still dying, and the remnants of the incinerated jungle still threatened to consume them all. The humans were losing. Until, suddenly, a soft radiance flooded the battlefield. The soldiers of the United Army faltered for a moment, looking at their own skin in amazement. They, themselves were the source of the radiance. It was as if white flames ignited within all of them, washing away their wounds, and making them much stronger, much faster, much more resilient. Augmenting them with fearsome power. Those who were on the verge of dying were saved, and those who were beaten and exhausted suddenly found themselves full of renewed might. The radiant army stirred, meeting the dark tide of abominable monsters, and pushing it back. Chapter 2249, Depths of Despair. Not long before that, Sid fell to the ground, blood pouring down the torn, bent metal of her breastplate. It was flowing out of her mouth, as well, but she was more concerned about the armor. The memory was on its last breath, ready to collapse into a rain of sparks. It was a shame, too, because the charming enchanter, Master Sunless, had personally improved it for her. More importantly, she was wearing very little under the armor. Becoming one of the Queen's dead puppets would already be bad enough, but shambling around the battlefield both dead and while wearing nothing but her underwear seemed simply mortifying. Ah, that'd be embarrassing. She reached for her sword and looked up, knowing full well that she would not escape the nightmare creature that had thrown her to the ground. The towering beast loomed above her, foamy saliva flowing between its rotting fangs. Before it could bite down, however, a slender figure in a tattered red dress appeared between Sid and the abomination, stubbornly holding her ground. The wavy dagger in her hand seemed like a toy compared to the immense size of the appalling creature. Felice, you fool! Was she hell-bent on dying together? Sid finally grasped the hilt of her sword, wondering if she would be able to stand up. The two of them were probably finished. They would make for a couple of lovely corpses, though. So, there was a bright side to anything. Using the sword as a cane, Sid groaned and rose to her feet. Some distance away, Ray and Fleur were desperately trying to survive in the sea of abominations. They had lost Ronnie and Tamar in the chaos of the battle a while ago, and the nightmare creatures around them were not something a couple of awakened could fight. Ray had thought about trying to escape by hiding himself, but he could not take Fleur with him, and he would not abandon her, either, so the two of them were barely staying alive. Staying alive for now. At some point, they found themselves protecting the backs of two unfamiliar masters. Judging by their age and armor, the masters seemed to be legacies from the Sword Army side. Neither of the young knights was in good shape, but one of them seemed barely alive, bleeding profusely from a deep cut on his head, mumbling nonsense, and asking for mercy. "Hey, Mercy, you saw it, right?" The other master grabbed his friend and pulled him back, saving the young man from the claws of a hideous abomination. Saw what? The bleeding knight somehow managed to behead the nightmare creature and staggered upright. That vulgar scoundrel. That profligate lecher, Master Sunless. He's the Lord of Shadows. I knew it. I told you. He has been deceiving Lady Neffys this whole time, the sinister rake. The other knight, Mercy, looked at him with concern. Were you hit on the head, Tristan? Wait, don't answer that, you were. Anyway, there is no way. Tristan shook his head, paying no attention to the blood streaming down his face. No, I saw it clearly. He is. At that moment, Fleur let out a scream and fell. Ray swayed, too, suddenly finding it hard to breathe. A terrifying, maddening presence enveloped their minds, and a new nightmare creature appeared in front of them, this one more dreadful than all the rest. Ra-Obes. A great one. Mercy paled, and Tristan raised his sword weakly. Neither stood a chance in the battle against a great abomination, especially not wounded and exhausted as they were. But what else could they do? Simply moving under the gaze of the terrifying being was a difficult task, while the being could obliterate the four of them in one move. All hope seemed lost, until something massive suddenly fell from the sky, flattening the great nightmare creature. It was. Ray blinked, doubting his eyes. It was a quaint brick cottage with glass windows and a wooden porch. The bloodied nightmare creature stirred beneath the cottage, sharp pieces of bone protruding through its hide. Before it could escape, though, a terrifying maw opened in the middle of the brick wall, and the cottage bit down on the great one, tearing its head off with countless sharp fangs. What? Ray, Fleur, Mercy, and Tristan froze, staring at the terrifying cottage with stunned expressions. For a moment, they even forgot about the sea of abominations surrounding them. It was then that the door of the cottage opened, and a petite young woman appeared on the porch, floating a few centimeters above the wooden boards. She looked at them with a pale face, and then shouted. "What are you waiting for? Get inside if you want to live, fools." Ray stared at the petite floating beauty for a moment, then looked behind her and shuddered at the morbid scene. The spacious room on the other side of the door was littered with bodies, blood smeared across the floor. It was like the belly of an insatiable, man-eating monster. He was terrified. What a bizarre abomination. Most chillingly of all, some bodies were still moving, suggesting that they had been swallowed whole. No, wait. Those weren't bodies, they were dozens of injured soldiers, slumped on the floor in exhaustion and treating their wounds. Ray lingered for a moment. Then, he grabbed Fleur into a princess carry and jumped onto the porch. Whatever. I don't care. The two dazed masters dawdled a little, then followed while muttering curses with shaky voices. Somewhere else, Rain was fighting side by side with Tamar and the Feather Knight, whose name was Telly, apparently. Things were not going great for the two great armies, and they were not going great for the three of them, either. Especially for Rain, who felt suffocated by her inability to kill. And yet, she could sense it, the nameless feeling swelling in her chest, becoming clearer and clearer. It was her awakening aspect. It felt as if a seal placed on her soul was slowly crumbling, ready to collapse entirely. The terror of the calamitous battle, the pain and indignation she felt while witnessing all this senseless destruction, the desperate desire to prevent all these lives from being wasted. Perhaps all she had to unseal her aspect was find the name for the emotion she felt. But the correct words were not coming, as if they did not exist in human language. And the three of them were on the verge of being destroyed, themselves. A hulking monstrosity had just torn an ascended knight apart, and was now barreling toward them, frenzy burning in its bloodshot eyes. Rain paled and raised her tachi, knowing that its blade would not even be able to cut the monster's hide. In the next moment, however, a fearsome figure of silvery black steel appeared from the darkness, its eyes blazing with infernal red flames. Four clawed hands reached for the charging abomination, piercing its body and raising the massive creature into the air. Then, with a revolting squelch, the nightmare creature was torn into four bleeding pieces. As blood flowed onto the four-armed fiend's dark carapace and evaporated, it turned its fiery gaze down and stared directly at Rain. The fiend's hellish maw opened, and a grating voice resounded from within. Addressing her, "Protect, Auntie." Rain blinked. "Huh, Auntie, me." She stared at the towering fiend, stunned. But she was barely 21. Chapter 2250, Flames of Hope. The nightmare creature was about to finish off Felice, whose dress was soaked with blood by then, and Sid was not swift enough anymore to stop it. It was then that a soft radiance suddenly illuminated the darkness, chasing it away. Sid's heart raced. Lady Neffes. Was she close? No, the last she had caught a glimpse of her, changing star was disappearing into the black sky, too far away to heal the dying soldiers with her soothing flames. But there was no mistaking it. Sid knew this feeling well, having relied on it to stay alive for many years, across numerous battlefields. Granted, the warmth spreading through her body, washing away the pain, was far more potent than usual. Her wounds were healing much faster than they usually did when bathed in the gentle white flame. That was not all, either. There was a soft radiance glowing beneath Sid's skin, and she felt powerful, invigorated. She was brimming with power, her exhaustion gone. It was as if her body, which had already been at the pinnacle of what an ascended could achieve, grew twice as strong. Even her soul felt empowered by the white radiance. Thank the gods. Activating her aspect abilities one after another, Sid rammed the abomination with her shoulder and sent it flying back. Felice. Turning to look at the handmaiden, Sid could not help but grin. Felice was emanating the same soft radiance, and her wounds were healing as well. No, it was not just Felice. It was everyone. All around them, hundreds of soldiers, both of the song and the sword domain, not that there was a difference anymore, were being nurtured by the pure white flames. Their wounds were healing, and their power grew. And further away, it was the same. Sid's eyes widened. How? Before, Lady Neffes could only bestow the gift of her flames to her most loyal followers, and only if they were close to her. She had developed that ability over the years, increasing its range and potency, until she could heal entire swaths of the battlefield, thousands of soldiers at the same time. But now, it was not just thousands, it was hundreds of thousands. The entire vast mass of the two great armies was being healed and empowered, while Lady Neffes was nowhere in sight. But even without seeing her, people knew who had saved them. Voices rose here and there, full of gratitude, relief, and hope. Changing Star. It's Lady Changing Star. Immortal Flame is with us. Sitting among the wounded soldiers that the petite fairy had rescued with the help of her terrifying cottage, Ray suddenly flinched. What the? The interior of the cottage was suddenly much brighter than it had been before. All around him, people were glowing. He was glowing, too. A familiar warmth filled his body, and the scrapes he had received during the battle disappeared without a trace. The same thing was happening to Fleur, and the two sword army masters that had helped them survive. In fact, the only person who wasn't shining with a soft radiance was their fairy hostess, who floated in the air with a confused expression on her impishly pretty face. Ray recognized this feeling. It was the same warmth he had felt while being healed by Lady Neffes. Outside the window, the soldiers of the two great armies were all being mended by the white flames, descending upon the sea of nightmare creatures with renewed vigor. One of the two sword army masters was the first one to stand up, summoning his sword and pointing to the door with a determined expression. "My fair lady, the benevolent mistress of the cottage, I, Tristan of Aegis Rose, am eternally grateful for your kindness. However, my honor compels me to rejoin the battle now that my wounds have been healed. Please, command your cottage to open its door." Ray and Fleur exchanged glances. Ronnie and Tamar were still out there, somewhere, fighting for their lives. Master Tristan must not have recovered from the blow to his head yet, considering his bizarre manner of speech, but the gist of what he had said was right. They could not hide away while their comrades were fighting and dying out there on the bloody battlefield. When Fleur nodded subtly, Ray sighed and rose to his feet. The rest of the soldiers slowly stood up, as well. They turned to the hostess of the monstrous cottage and waited, their eyes were full of somber resolve. The petite fairy looked at them strangely. There was a pause, and then, she said, "The door has a handle, you know. You can just open it yourself." Rain stumbled and looked at Tamar with wide eyes. It was not every day that she saw her friend, glowing softly with a beautiful white radiance, as if she was a celestial being. No, wait, why was the Feather Knight glowing, as well? Why was everyone except for Rain herself and the towering steel fiend, that was? Their wounds were healing in front of her eyes, and their movements had turned swifter, the bite of their blades deeper. For a few moments, the nightmare creatures were actually pushed back. Rain remained still for a moment. It has to be Nephi's, right? Her head turned, and she stared into the distance. At the grotesque, harrowing, beautiful creature that towered above the shattered battlefield like a mountain. Queen's Song. Just as Rain looked at her, a fiery white meteor suddenly pierced the darkness of the black sky and crashed into the towering figure of the queen, causing a titanic explosion to shake the entire world. That was Changing Star, returning from the heavens. But there was something different about her now. Rain could not see from the distance, however, she knew one thing: the queen actually staggered from the blow despite not having been bothered by any attack before. Wait. A moment later, Rain forgot all about Queen's Song. And about Changing Star, as well. It was because she sensed something that made her hair stand on end. She sensed the shadows all across the battlefield growing deeper, darker, and infinitely colder than before. As the great armies bathed in the warmth of the white flames, a sudden chill spread across the battlefield, as if death itself had let out a frigid breath. And then, the shadows moved. Chapter 2251, Supreme Shadow. A sudden chill spread across the battlefield, and a moment later, the darkness that had been pushed back by the sea of soft radiance seemed to grow deeper and darker, consuming the pure white light. Far away from where Rain was shivering in the cold, the King of Swords stood above a fearsome black mask that lay on the ground. The merciless sunlight was pouring from the torn veil of clouds, and so, he remained motionless, his sword still reaching toward the enemy who had turned to ash. His face was expressionless, but there was a hint of unease in his steely gray eyes. The Lord of Shadows was gone, killed not by an enemy's blade, but by his own blade. And yet, his shadow remained. A disembodied shadow was a strange sight to behold, but it was the mask that made the king wary. Laying atop the forlorn shadow, the fearsome mox stared back at him, impenetrable darkness nestling in its eyes. And then, it trembled. Almost at the same time, the blinding radiance of the incandescent white abyss dimmed. The veil of clouds repaired itself, and the space he had severed was mended, as well. Anvil was suddenly surrounded by cold darkness. The fearsome black mask rose into the air, the shadow of his slain enemy rising with it, taking shape, until it turned into a familiar figure. The Lord of Shadows looked at the King of Swords coldly, as good as new. Anvil seemed rattled for the first time in many, many years. Impossible. It was not that his enemy seemed to have come back to life after being burned to ash by the merciless sky of Godgrave. It was that his subtle, but chilling presence had somehow grown vastly more powerful, now dwarfing even Anvil's own. The mask dissolved into shadows, revealing a handsome, pale face. There was a sinister smile on the young man's lips, but his black eyes remained bitingly cold. Smiling darkly, Sunny looked at Anvin. "Oh, but it is possible, King of Swords." He raised a hand, commanding Serpent to assume the form of a black Odachi, and inhaled the sweet air of the world of the living with a full chest. He felt incredible. His body brimmed with ferocious power, more power than he had ever felt before. The difference between a supreme physique and a transcendent physique was not as vast as one between a saint and a master, but it was still substantial. The other changes that he had undergone were profound enough to make up for the relative modesty of his physical evolution. He was still making sense of some of them, but other differences were quite apparent. First of all, there was the quality of his essence. It had become far more potent, overflowing with an unfathomable amount of cold, fearsome power. Second, there was the quantity of his essence. In short, it felt endless. Sunny possessed 7 cores and soul weave, so the rate at which he replenished essence had always been abnormally swift. That rate had further improved now that he was supreme, but it was not the main reason why his reserves of essence seemed inexhaustible. Rather, it was because of the way he absorbed spirit essence. Before, Sunny could passively absorb small quantities of it when surrounded by his source element. But now, he was receiving a constant flow of it from his domain, from every silent shadow resting in his soul. His connection to the silent shadows had deepened and evolved, and since there were tens of thousands of them, the influx of essence from the shadows made it almost impossible for him to exhaust it. In other words, a sovereign had access to a nearly limitless amount of soul essence for as long as they were in their domain. That explained a lot about how Anvil and Ki Song were able to wield their incredible powers, as well as some of their actions during the war. But Sunny was not like them. He was quite special. In fact, he was unique. Because, unlike other Supremes, he carried his domain within his soul. Therefore, his domain was self-contained, and would be with him wherever he went. He did not need citadels to make it stronger, he did not need loyal followers and the faith of the people, either. Ronobes. All he needed was to collect the shadows of living beings by slaying them. What a frightening proposition. Sunny was scared to even imagine such power in the hands of someone who was not as reliably sane and mentally stable as he was. The most drastic change, of course, was his will. It had become a far more tangible force, now, as well as far more forceful. Sunny had known how to wield it before, but it was only after he clashed with Anvil and observed him using the will as a weapon that he truly understood how to control it. How to bend the world to his will. It would take him some time to truly master that skill, of course, as well as incorporate it into his combat technique, but he already knew enough to make use of it in a battle. There were quite a few changes of a lesser scale, too. The onyx mantle, for example, was not onyx anymore. His armor was still black, but the texture of its polished surface had changed, becoming even darker, even smoother, almost flawless. It had assumed a noble, somewhat eerie quality, as if carved from black jade. The onyx mantle had evolved, as well, becoming the jade mantle. Oh, and of course, the very nature of his soul had changed. The soul of an ascended was contained within their body. The soul of a transcended expanded beyond the body, partially fusing with the world. The vast soul of a supreme, meanwhile, could be freely unleashed upon the world via the medium of a domain, subjugating it. That was the fundamental principle of what a domain was, to begin with. And so, looking at Anvil, Sunny unleashed his soul. He manifested his domain. And as he did, the shadows across the fractured battlefield moved. Chapter 2252, Sovereign of Death. Far away, an incandescent star fell from the dark sky, and a colossal explosion of white flame enveloped the dreadful figure of the queen. The two unified great armies shone with beautiful light, pushing the flood of nightmare creatures back for a few short moments. The wounded were healed, and the morale of those who had almost lost hope was bolstered. Sunny smiled. Nephis had succeeded, as well. A profound relief flooded his heart. As much as Sunny had steeled it to accept the possibility that numerous people would die as a result of their rebellion, consumed by the nightmare spell, he was incredibly relieved to know that the worst had not come to pass. Their plan had worked. Both Sunny and Nephis had become supreme. In fact, the two of them seemed to have attained supremacy at the same time. Nephis was already helping the two unified armies. So, it was only proper for him to lend a hand, as well. Sunny allowed one of his shadows to separate itself from his body and dart away. Now that he was supreme, each of his shadows was deep in vast Lycian ocean. A few seconds later, the shadow reached its destination, and opened like a gate that led to the tranquil depths of his lightless soul. Come forth, my shadows. Sunny laughed. Look closely, King of Swords. Look and see why war can never triumph over death. As his words echoed in the darkness, a cold wind blew across the battlefield, as though death itself had let out a frigid breath. The shadows moved, and dark figures slowly rose from them like an inky black sea. There were a myriad of them, some were small, some were enormous. Some were weak, some were immensely powerful. Some were human, while most were monstrous. The army of shadows had left the peaceful stillness of his soul and entered the real world, flowing across the surface of the ancient bone in eerie silence. The shadow of Mountain King was among them. There was a legion of nightmare creatures of the forgotten shore, led by the appalling spire messenger and the forsaken knight of the ruined cathedral, and a few sleepers of the bright castle as well, led by the shadows of Haruz, Castor, and the lost companions of the first bright lord. The shadow of the soul-devouring tree towered above the battlefield, its enormous branches swaying in the wind. There was a legion of abominations from the chained isles, too, led by the shadows of the war maidens and the twin shadows of Solvane. The barrow wraiths Sunny had once slain, while defending Rain's school from a nightmare gate, were there, as well. The largest legion by far was the nightmare creatures Sunny had slain in Antarctica. Fallen Titan Goliath was among them, as well as Winter Beast. There was also the defiled Seeker of Truth, the remnant of the Jade Queen, Sibyl of the Fallen Grace, the shadows of Knight Amaran and Saint Dire Fang were there, too. There were dreadful abominations of the tomb of Ariel there, as well. The shadows of King Darren and Windflower led them, standing side by side under the sky of the Dream Realm once again. There were the shadows of various nightmare creatures he had killed while wandering the Dream Realm, forgotten by everyone. Lastly, there was a vast legion of powerful nightmare creatures whom Sunny had slain here, in Godgrave. The 6 saints of the Song army he had killed were among them, too, led by the giant with the head of a jackal, Raos. And at the head of the Shadow army, serving as its general. A taciturn knight in an intricate onyx armor sat atop a tenebrous steed, her graceful figure shrouded by a mantle of dread and darkness. The only shadow that refused to answer Sunny's call was the shadow of condemnation, which remained quietly in his soul. The rest of them, however, stirred as Saint raised her black sword. Sunny smiled viciously and looked at Anvil. Kill them all. Saint pointed her sword forward, and a sea of silent shadows surged. As it flowed forward in eerie silence, it separated into 3 forces. One of the 3 forces came to the rescue of the human armies. Nephis had already bestowed the power of her radiant domain upon the desperate soldiers, but now, countless shadows joined the fight, obliterating the nightmare creatures of the abominable jungle. And with each creature they killed, a new shadow appeared on the surface of the dark lake within Sunny's soul, escaping it moments later to join the battle on his side. The second force descended upon the puppets of the Queen, aiming to annihilate them all. The third force clashed with the remnants of the storm of flying swords, destroying them one after another. Looking at it, Sunny could not help but shiver. Even he was a little afraid of his newfound power. His power just seemed exponentially terrifying. It was like death itself. But maybe that was what it meant, to be a sovereign. Especially a sovereign carrying the power of a divine aspect. And he had no doubt that the Dream Realm hid many horrors that could put even his terrible power to shame. Horrors that could break him, let alone stop him. As his shadow legions were reaping lives and destroying the forces of the king and the queen, Sunny turned to Anvil with a pleased smile. Not bad for a rookie sovereign, don't you think? Anvil just stared at him coldly, a hint of unease in his gray eyes. Natural supremacy. That is impossible. How did you? Sunny chuckled. Well, if you wish to know. He took a step forward. I traveled to the very edge of the Dream Realm, scaled the jagged peaks of the Hollow Mountains, descended to a land below the underworld to seek counsel from the corpse of a forgotten godslayer, killed the shadow of a corrupted god, forged a blessed sword for an incorruptible soul, cheated death by taking my own life, and survived. Then, he looked at Anvil with dark fury and added in a low voice. But mostly, I just really wanted to kill you. I guess you just pissed me off that badly, Anvil. Grasping the hilt of his odachi, Sunny pointed it at the King of Sword. So, prepare to die, bastard. Chapter 2253, Reversal. Even if Anvil had been rattled by the shocking turn of events, he did not allow himself to stay in that state for more than a few seconds. After all, he had come to this battlefield to fight a sovereign. It did not matter much to him whether he had to fight Ki Song or the Lord of Shadows. There was a lot Sunny had to adjust to, however. The fractured bone plane shuddered as he pushed against it with his foot. His newly found power was too vast, too tyrannical. Underestimating his own speed, Sunny failed to align his sword properly and missed Anvil entirely, crashing into him instead of beheading him with one clean, ruthless strike. Their clash caused a shockwave to tear the world apart, and Anvil was thrown dozens of meters back. The impact was truly terrible. Sunny looked down at his armor, expecting to see fractures marring the smooth surface of the jet-black jade. However, to his surprise, the mantle was entirely intact. It was Anvil's impenetrable armor that dented, instead. A vicious smile twisted Sunny's lips. You must have worked quite hard to forge this supreme suit of armor. A split second later, he was already upon Anvil, slashing down with his black odachi. His speed was so great that it seemed as if Sunny was blinking in and out of existence instead of moving across the weathered bone. Anvil still managed to deflect the blow, though, staggering back as a result. Sunny smiled. I bought my armor from a sleeper for a fistful of soul shards. Behind the smile, however, he was a little wary. Serpent's class depended on Sunny's own, but its rank depended on his mastery of shadow dance. So, it was still a transcendent titan despite Sunny already being a supreme one. Anvil's condemning sword, though, was sacred. If Sunny was not careful, his shadow could be destroyed. So, he allowed 3 of his shadows to flow down his arms and envelop Serpent, instead, augmenting both its power and its resilience. It was only then that Sunny considered his current state. His original body had been destroyed, so only the 7 incarnations remained. It was a strange reversal. Before, he had been a human who needed to spend essence in order to turn into a shadow, but now being a shadow was his natural state. Instead, he needed to spend essence to assume the shape of a human. The expenditure was minuscule compared to the unfathomable rate with which he replenished essence, but it was still a curious fact. In any case, one of his shadows was serving as a gate for the Silent Legion, 3 were augmenting Serpent, and 3 were serving as his body now. Which meant that he was still 3 times stronger than Anvil, more so, really, since the Shadow Realm fragment was empowering him. The King of Swords stood no chance. It was as if their roles had been reversed. Sensing the gap but remaining indifferent to it, Anvil grasped the hilt of his sacred sword with both hands and looked at Sunny somberly. You talk too much. Sunny grinned as he raised the black odachi. That's because I have a lot to say. They clashed once again, moving with stunning speed. This time, Anvil was the one to lash out with his sword, empowering his attack with razor-sharp will, just like he had done before to cut Sunny's courage, determination, and hope. Rayab es. However, this time, his cold will clashed with Sunny's own. And although Sunny was new to wielding his will in a battle, he managed to resist Anvil's ruthless strike unscathed. His grin widened. Now, then, let me get a few things off my chest. As the smile disappeared from his face, replaced by a chillingly cold expression, he exploded into a whirlwind of darkness. The clangor of steel roared above the fractured bone plane, and the ancient bone itself groaned, huge chunks of it plummeting into the black smoke veiling the burning hollows below. Sunny unleashed a barrage of strikes upon Anvil, suppressing him and pushing him back. Where should I start? He cut down, used the momentum of his deflected attack to close in, and rammed the King of Swords with his shoulder. Anvil let out a pained grunt. First of all, you are a rotten bastard. Even worse, you are also an utter fool. Did you really think that strangling your heart and turning yourself into an emotionless tyrant would save you from the curse of your flaw? That you would not lose anything if you did not care about anything? Anvil caught the black blade of the serpentine odachi in a bind, but Sunny lowered his hands and easily overpowered him, circling the sacred sword and pushing his own up. Anvil leaned back at the last moment, but a long cut was still left on his cheek, swelling with blood. That is the entire reason you lost everything, you vile fool. If you were not such a sorry excuse of a father, your children would not have grown to despise you. And if you were not such a failure as a ruler, your subjects would not have turned their back on you. All of this mess is your doing. One foolish man has almost destroyed the world. Bastard, are you proud of yourself? Anvil did not respond, straining to survive in the onslaught of lethal attacks. Maybe engaging in a conversation was a luxury he could not afford at the moment, perhaps he simply did not care. His cold gray eyes were calm and focused. Sunny snarled, thrusting his odachi forward to destroy one of the red runes glowing on the surface of Anvil's armor. Secondly, damn, where do I even begin? Stifling humanity's growth to prevent more gates from opening. Suppressing and eliminating our most talented warriors to stop them from becoming saints. Abandoning billions of people to die because trying to save everyone seemed less likely to succeed. Starting a bloody damn war against fellow humans instead of aiming your precious swords at the nightmare creatures. You scum, that was your grand strategy. That was the best you could do. He growled and took a step forward instead of taking a step back to avoid the falling blade of Anvil's sword. Catching it on his odachi, Sunny pulled both blades downward and slammed his elbow into Anvil's face, feeling with great satisfaction something give under his titanic blow. As Anvil staggered back once more, blood flowing from his nose, Sunny looked at him with murderous madness burning in his black, terrifying eyes. And lastly, he aimed his odachi at Anvil's heart. Bastard, what nonsense were you spouting about forging Nephi's into a flawless sword? How fucking unhinged are you, you piece of trash? Come on, say it again, I dare you. Say it one last time before I pull your tongue out, cut it, and then feed it back to you. I'm listening. The black odachi lashed out once again, throwing Anvil to his knees. Bloodied and reeling, the King of Swords looked up at Sunny. And smiled. Chapter 2254, Spirit of Flame. Their clash had been swift, but violent. However, it was also, a bit one-sided, which left Sunny wanting more. Well, there was no helping it. As much as he would have wanted to break the King of Swords slowly, now that he was a supreme, the imbalance of power between them was simply too great. It was not only because Sunny was a supreme titan while Anvil was a supreme beast, or because of the fact that Sunny wielded a divine aspect, it was also due to the fact that Anvil's powers were both undermined and severely suppressed. His aspect was one of a craftsman and enchanter, as well, only loosely tied to combat. Anvil's armor and sword had flared with various potent enchantments while they fought, but Sunny was powerful and resilient enough to shrug the effects off. It was almost like Anvil's own strategy during the war. Nothing was of use in the face of overwhelming strength. And there were 6 incarnations of Sunny, while Anvil was alone. So, the King of Swords looked quite battered by now. Many of the runes glowing on his armor had been destroyed, and the armor itself was slow to repair itself after enduring numerous blows. His face was bloodied, and his hair was wet with sweat despite the chilling cold. Even his sacred sword was nicked, its blade damaged in several places. Nevertheless, Anvil did not seem disturbed. Instead, creepily enough, his smile seemed genuine when he looked up at Sunny. What is this bastard smiling about? Anvil remained silent for a few moments, then spoke in a hoarse voice. You can mock me all you want, Lord of Shadows. But, look, isn't my masterpiece beautiful? With that, he turned his head and looked into the distance, where the towering figure of the queen was staggering after enduring the annihilating shockwave of an awful explosion. As Sunny's face contorted in a wrathful grimace, he added, She has surprised me once more. She is complete. Far away, Nephis had descended from the godless sky like a falling star. The darkness welcomed her with a soothing cold, and a split second later, she collided with the colossal vessel of the queen, her flames blossoming into a terrifying explosion. An empty set beta S. This time, the titanic creature actually staggered. More importantly, the burns on its flesh did not disappear immediately. In that short moment when Ki Song was reeling, Nephis looked to the spot where Sunny had been kneeling, on the verge of being killed by Anvil. Her radiant figure suddenly shone even brighter. He's alive. A sense of profound relief washed over her. Nephis had been scared that she would be late, but the Lord of Shadows did not need her help. Not only had he survived, but he had also achieved the same feat as her. He had broken the barrier preventing them from attaining supremacy and became a sovereign. The sovereign of light, the sovereign of shadows. With the two of them becoming supreme against all odds, victory was all but assured. We've won. She allowed herself to bask in that startling realization for a moment, then strangled it ruthlessly. Arrogance was a deadly poison. Sure, it seemed like Anvil and Ki Song, who had been weakened by their nefarious plot and by battling each other, were at a dire disadvantage against the usurpers, but it was in these last moments when victory seemed so near that one could touch it when countless warriors had perished, lulled into complacency by the illusion of safety. Nephis was not going to make the same mistake. Some distance away, the two great armies were shining with the radiance of her newly established domain. The darkness stirred, and countless shadows rose from its depths, descending upon their enemies. Nephis thought that she saw a few familiar figures among the Dark Legion, but her mind soon wandered back to her enemy. The queen had regained her balance in mere moments and froze, studying her with the eerily empty canvas of the golem's featureless face. Supremacy. Instead of answering, Nephis raised the blessing and delivered an annihilating strike. She had nothing to say. Her soul had been destroyed and then rebuilt countless times, and the cores she had sacrificed were now whole again. So, in the end, she did not have to use the ruined trait of the blessing, at least for now. She was not that desperate yet. But there was still a problem. Even now that the blessing had become a supreme blade, channeling supreme soul flame, the damage it dealt was not significant enough to seriously harm the colossal flesh golem. What's more, the queen could transfer all harm to her countless puppets, and although they were being destroyed by the Legion of Shadows, they had not been destroyed yet. Nephis needed a different way to attack the queen, a more monstrous attack, and one that could be sustained instead of being momentary. Landing on the ground, Nephis looked up at the harrowing creature that she needed to destroy. She could not even see all of it from that angle because of how immensely tall the titanic flesh golem was. She was like a speck of dust in front of a mountain, full of resolve to bring the mountain down. Lowering her head, Nephis took a deep breath, or went through the motions of doing so, rather, since her current form neither had lungs nor needed to breathe. She was still in the form of the spirit of light. Her radiant figure was like a vessel that struggled to contain an ocean of furious flame. And as the queen leaned down to crush that vessel, Nephis looked up with cold contempt, unleashing the flame. Allowing the thin barrier of the human-like form to dissolve into pure radiance, thus assuming her true transcendent form. An unimaginable, roaring mass of white flame escaped from her disappearing figure, rising to meet the queen. The flames moved with purpose and intent, like a living creature, the billowing cloud of them constantly shifting and dancing in the vast darkness of the fractured battlefield. The darkness reeled back in fear. The vessel of the queen was more than a kilometer tall, and so, the mass of white flames rose to be more than a kilometer tall. It fell upon the titanic creature, burning it, and then enveloped it whole. Chapter 2255, Shadow Legion. Out there on the battlefield, Sid rolled, evading the maw of the grotesque nightmare creature she and Felice were fighting. The abomination moved on the edge between the radiance emanated by the human army and the deep darkness that surrounded it, its shape both hulking and indescribably frightening. The situation had vastly improved after the miraculous flames enveloped the desperate soldiers. Awash in pure light and empowered by its brilliance, they cast their despair away and threw themselves into the battle with renewed vigor. Not only had they become stronger, but their wounds would also heal and disappear without leaving a trace. It was as if they were immortal. An immortal army of hundreds of thousands of awakened, could there be anything more terrifying? The endless flood of terrifying abominations suddenly did not seem so fearsome anymore. But therein lay the problem. While it felt like the soldiers had become immortal, they had not. They recovered from dire wounds in mere moments, but if a person was outright killed or torn to pieces, even the miraculous flames would not save them. So, the battle was far from being over, and survival was still not guaranteed. That was why Sid cursed as she scrambled to evade the lunging nightmare creature. However, the nightmare creature never reached it. A chilling wind blew across the battlefield, and the shadows moved. In the next moment, the lunging beast slammed into the ground, convulsed, and let out a frightened wail. Something massive was in the darkness behind it, pinning it to the ground, hurting it. As Sid watched in stunned horror, the colossal abomination was dragged into the darkness in the blink of an eye. Its wail was cut off abruptly. All she saw out there was a glimpse of a terrifying beak, a mess of gaunt limbs, and a mass of black feathers. A deep fear that she thought she had forgotten rose from the depths of her heart and grasped it with icy claws. Looking at Felice, Sid shivered and said, her stunned voice full of disbelief. Spire messenger. It was a spire messenger. What was one of those cursed things doing in Godgrave? At the same time, all around the battlefield, the silent legion of shadows descended on the spawns of the Scarlet Jungle. A harrowing massacre unlike anything the seasoned warriors of the great armies had seen before began, washing the white bone in blood. In one corner of the battlefield, Revel was kneeling on the ground, pale and weak from paying the price for having gone against her flaw to join the battle in daylight. She could barely move, before she was swallowed by a towering great abomination, though, the shadow of a giant with the head of a jackal slammed into it, and the shadow of a monstrous wolf-like warrior sank its gangs into the creature's throat. Her eyes widened. Somewhere else, Sation, Cassie, and Moonvale were fighting side by side. The latter had recovered from her wounds thanks to the white flames, but was still a bit dazed. As they were besieged by a swarm of grotesque spider-like monstrosities, twin shadows of a stunningly beautiful woman cut into the swarm, tearing the abominations apart. ABE circumflex S. All around the battlefield, the soldiers watched in awe and terror as the eerie legion of silent shadows flowed out of the darkness like a river, slaughtering their enemies. Most of the shadows were just as dreadful as the nightmare creatures that besieged the radiant army, and yet there was no mistaking who commanded them. The Lord of Shadows. It was hard not to realize that it was the sinister sellsword saint who had summoned the Dark Legion from the depths of some forgotten hell, considering that his famous Echo was leading the silent charge, galloping atop the dreadful steed as her black blade rose and fell, reaping the lives of powerful abominations like death's own scythe. Two furious crimson flames burned behind the visor of her helmet, and a trail of severed bodies was left in her wake. The graceful Knight of Darkness was not the only being whom the soldiers recognized, though. All across the battlefield, those who had been in the Antarctic center during the Chain of Nightmares faltered for a moment, looking up at the towering figure of the fallen titan, Goliath. The Fire Keepers and the Handmaidens caught glimpses of the nightmare creatures of the Forgotten Shore. Others were terrified to see the hulking figures of the dreadful abominations who had been slain in front of their eyes during the conquest of Godgrave. It was as if the gates of the land of the dead had been opened. There were many instances like that, instilling the soldiers with relief, gratitude, and fear in equal parts. Even knowing that the Silent Legion belonged to the Lord of Shadows, it was hard not to fear it, and fear him, as well. At a certain spot on the battlefield, Rain let out a long sigh and lowered her tachi for a moment. Tamar was looking around with a pale face by her side, while the Feather Knight stared at a bizarre figure that moved across the sky in the distance, half obscured by the vast whirlwind of flying swords. This is, its winter beast. Her voice was full of wariness and loathing. Rain gave her a long look, and then forced out a smile. Don't worry. I am quite certain that these things won't hurt us. They belong to my brother, I think. Telly and Tamar turned to her with similarly confused expressions. You brother. You have a brother. Rain coughed and scratched the back in embarrassment. Ah, yes. Actually, you already met him. Tamar raised an eyebrow. I did. Noticing another nightmare creature barreling towards them, Rain raised her tachi. Yeah. My brother, he is the rest of her sentence drowned in a bestial howl of the lunging abomination. Far away, the colossal vessel of the queen was being consumed by the dancing mass of white flames. She clawed at her own flesh, trying to extinguish the fire that was consuming her, but to no avail. The flesh golem was being annihilated by the fire faster than Ki Song could repair its flesh. At the same time, Nephis was healing her soul faster than Ki Song could destroy it. Until the queen shifted strategy, transferring the damage dealt to her vessel away. Almost instantly, countless puppets across the battlefield ignited like torches and turned to ash. A moment later, even more burned, and a moment after that, even more. It did buy Ki Song some time, allowing her to unleash the full power of her insidious aspect upon Nephis and temporarily catch up to her in their vicious battle of attrition. There were not that many of her puppets left on the battlefield, though. And even those that remained were being swiftly burned by the flames and slaughtered by the shadows. Chapter 2256, Abominable Curse. She is complete. Sunny traced Anvil's gaze and remained motionless for a few moments, looking at the towering figure of the queen's vessel, which was enveloped by white flame like a gargantuan pyre. Her dead flesh was burning. Sunny's pale face was illuminated by the distant light of Neph's transcendent form. Looking at her, he took a deep breath and forced his murderous anger to subside. His expression turned cold and somber. Glancing at Anvil, he remained silent for a bit, and then said with a hint of disdain in his voice. You see, this is your root problem. A failure of imagination, or ambition, perhaps. Taking a step forward, Sunny pressed the tip of his odachi against Anvil's neck. Nephis. Complete. She is not complete, Anvil, she won't be complete until she becomes divine. Unlike you and the other two ghouls, she will not surrender until she conquers the nightmare spell entirely. That, in the end, is your sin. That is the reason why you don't deserve to sit on the throne of humanity, and she does. That is why you must die. Anvil glanced at him with a dark smile. Funny, isn't it? Sunny's expression grew colder. And what, exactly, do you find so funny? Anvil shrugged. She is just like her father, in that regard. Ah, but I think that she resembles her mother much more, instead. Sunny took a deep breath, holding himself back. There was a reason why he was wasting time conversing with Anvil instead of simply finishing him off, of course. It was not because Sunny had suddenly developed a fondness for villainous monologues, although he would lie if he said that giving Anvil a piece of his mind had not felt good. No, it was because Sunny had to get something out of Anvil before the King of Swords met an ignoble end. There was something he had to know. He exhaled slowly. Right, you bastards killed Broken Sword, as well. Was that also for the greater good? Anvil's eyes darkened. You should know by now why he had to die, Lord of Shadows. All of this could have been avoided if not for that selfish man's folly. Sunny smiled faintly, suppressing the desire to cut off the king's self-righteous head. Controlling his expression, he said, "Enlighten me." Anvil let out a sigh and calmly looked Sunny in the eye. It was because he absorbed Weaver's forbidden lineage, of course. Our hands were tied the moment he did. Sunny allowed himself to frown slightly, pretending to be clueless. As far as everyone was concerned, even Cassie and Nephis, he was the heir of Shadow God. No one knew that Weaver's blood flowed in his veins, instead. Rao es. Anvil would not know, either. He raised an eyebrow and asked, hiding how vital knowing the answer to that question was to him. And why was that so important? What was it about Weaver's lineage that made you betray your comrade? To kill your own leader. Anvil smiled coldly. Children, you don't know anything, do you? Well, no surprise. Some things are not meant to be known by mere mortals. As the hurricane of swords above them shifted, numerous blades changing direction, he leaned forward a little and asked, why did Broken Sword have to die? Let me ask you a question instead, Lord of Shadows, have you ever been to the Chained Isles? You should have. Why did the gods destroy Hope's kingdom and imprison her in the ivory tower? This time, Sunny's frown was genuine. He hesitated for a few moments, and then responded in a subdued voice. Because demons were their flaw. Anvil chuckled. Indeed, demons were the flaw of the gods. Because demons were children of the forgotten god. Sunny drew a breath as Anvil shook his head and continued. And yet, the gods did not punish and imprison all 7 demons. Only Hope. Why was that? Sunny hesitated with the answer. I'm not sure. I heard once, that it was because she was the only demon who was worshipped by humans. Anvil looked at him with a grim resignation and nodded, not paying attention to the blade of the odachi that had cut into his neck. Yes, it was because Hope was the only demon who was benevolent toward humans, those who carried the sparks of the original desire. She came to live among them, cared for them, and bestowed gifts upon them. As a result, she was beloved by humans, worshipped by them. His voice turned heavy and dark. But she was a daughter of the Forgotten God. She carried the lineage of the Forgotten God. And therefore, everyone who worshipped her, was worshipping the Forgotten God. Was propagating his name, his divinity, and his power. And the more they did. Sunny's eyes widened slowly, but Anvil did not seem to notice, continuing in the same stark tone. The more he stirred in his slumber, coming closer and closer to awakening. That was why the gods destroyed the kingdom of Hope and imprisoned her. That was why they had forbidden the demons from siring offspring, as well. And that is why Weaver's lineage, created in secret, is an abominable curse that should never have existed. He gritted his teeth. The Forgotten God is closer to awakening today than he has ever been. Now, then, imagine if Broken Sword, the most revered hero of humanity, was allowed to build a vast and powerful domain while carrying that abominable curse. How many humans would have known him, loved him, and worshipped him? What would have happened then? Sunny shivered, feeling his mind go blank for a moment. He did not know what to answer, he did not want to know the answer. He would not have answered if not for the pain of his flaw, which forced him to be honest even if he wished to deceive himself. Feeling something cold permeate his chest, he said slowly. The Forgotten God, would have grown more aware of reality. Or maybe even awakened from his slumber completely. Hearing his words, Anvil smiled darkly. Yes. Now, you know, that is why we killed Broken Sword. Because an heir of Weaver must never be known, must never be loved, and must never be worshipped by humanity. Chapter 2257, Mercy of Shadow. Must never be known, must never be loved, must never be worshipped. Sunny stared at Anvil, no emotion showing itself on his face. A deep, boundless darkness nestled in his eyes. Far above them, all around them, numerous flying swords rustled as they slowly assembled into a gargantuan dome. Sunny looked up, then sighed deeply. Good thing I became fateless, then. The world had forgotten him, after all. Nobody could love him, because nobody could know him. Not truly, anyway. As the full weight of that realization settled on his heart, he raised his head and looked into the distance. There, the titanic vessel of the Queen was being consumed by fire. The distant radiance of the stunning white flames illuminated his face, but failed to dispel the shadow drowning his eyes. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then lowered his gaze to the ground. And good thing I had always shied away from the spotlight. He had been pushed to hide the full extent of his power by the very nature of his aspect, staying in the shadows and avoiding being noticed, let alone known. Unlike Broken Sword, who had been the most renowned and revered warrior of humanity, Sunny used to be seen as merely a supporting character of someone else's story. It was as if fate had been guiding him to this moment from the very first day. It had both led him to the forbidden lineage of Weaver and given him the necessary tools to escape its curse. Even without knowing the reason why the weave had been forbidden, Sunny mostly managed to avoid paying the price for receiving its incredible boons. Earning a true name in the first nightmare, possessing a divine aspect, finding a lineage memory, and accomplishing all his astonishing feats, anyone else would have become a venerated champion of humanity, but Sunny had hidden himself well. He detested the idea of being called a hero, anyway, so staying in the shadows suited his tastes far more. Nephews could stay in the spotlight for both of them. There was a small problem, though. Sunny had done well in the past, but currently, he was not doing that great as far as remaining unnoticed went. In fact, he really messed up. Sleeper Sunless, Awakened Sunless, and Master Sunless were all obscure and seemingly insignificant figures. The Lord of Shadows, however, was quite infamous. Worse than that, he was poised to become a sovereign. His renown would explode and spread throughout both worlds, surpassing even that of Broken Sword, A Omicron Bs. Because Broken Sword, despite all his accomplishments, had been a mere saint in the public's eye, the first and the most powerful of all human saints at the time, but still only a transcendent. Sunny, however, was a demigod now. Not only was he a demigod, but he was also the only equal Nephis, the shining star of humanity, had. Her counterpart, most powerful ally, and rumored lover as well. In other words, he had entered the stage, and the spotlight, in a manner that was impossible to conceal. Once the war was over, billions of people would come to know him, and although it was doubtful that he would be beloved by many, he would definitely be feared, revered, and worshipped by all. The soldiers of the two great armies would return home to spread the tales of his terrifying power and merciless blade. They would also be full of gratitude since he had saved countless lives. And his fame would only grow from there. Ah, how troublesome. The future was not entirely grim, though. There was a silver lining, as well. It was that Sunny's domain did not depend on people. He only needed shadows, and shadows, unlike humans, did not carry the sparks of the original desire in their souls. Shadows did not even have souls, really, so being worshipped by them would not bring about the end of the world. So, Sunny did not have to cripple his power if he wished to avoid disturbing the slumber of the forgotten god, who would swallow all of existence if awakened. Which was good, because they were going to need all the power they could get. He only needed to disappear into the shadows again, somehow. Hypocrite. Shaking off his reverie, Sunny looked at Anvil with a calm, cold expression and said in a measured tone, I really hate hypocrites like you the most, Anvil. You say that Broken Sword had to be killed to prevent humanity from worshipping him, and yet, you sovereigns managed to hide your own existence for almost 2 decades, all in order to contain Astarion. Why was it that you could hide, but Broken Sword had to die? He shook his head in contempt. No. Just admit it. Be honest for once. You killed him because you hated him. As simple as that. Anvil smiled coldly as Sunny raised a hand, having removed it from the hilt of his odachi. What do you even know about hatred, boy? With that, his presence exploded with tyrannical power, and the storm of swords around them froze. Numerous blades assembled into gargantuan runes. The runes ignited with vermilion radiance, and Sunny suddenly found himself awash in a blood-red glow. As Anvil moved his hand, a single harrowing blade fell from the sky, and the sky itself seemed to follow. A hurricane rose, the wind howling deafeningly as it swirled around them, and as the falling sword plummeted from the heights, its dreadful sharpness seemed to grow exponentially keener with each glowing ring of runes that it pierced. Until it seemed sharp enough to cut the fractured bone plane, sever the floor of the burning hollows, and part the sea of ash below. Of course, first, it would pierce Sunny first. Looking up, Sunny grasped the memory that he had summoned a moment before and raised his hand higher. The severing sword fell on him in a furious maelstrom of wind. The powerful gale raised a cloud of ash into the air, and by the time the ash settled, Sunny was still standing in the same spot, unmoved, and entirely unscathed. There was a small stone lantern in his hand, its gate wide open. Lowering it, he slowly closed the gate with his thumb. Anvil's eyes widened. How did you withstand that attack? Above them, the runes lost their glow, and countless flying swords crumbled into a river of scarlet sparks. Sunny smiled. I did not withstand it. I simply sent your sword into the shadow realm. Why should I overcome your great power when I can escape it with a little trick, instead? The smile drained slowly from his face. Now, then, the black odachi lashed out, sinking into Anvil's flesh. Sunny's expression turned dark and chilling. This is for the soldiers of the 1st Evacuation Army and the people of Falcon Scott, whom you abandoned to death. Samara, Dorn, Bell, and countless others. Remember their names, bastard. The King of Swords managed to avoid a fatal blow, but Sunny was already delivering another slash. Anvil tried to deflect it with his vambrace, but failed. Red blood flowed onto the white bone, and a severed hand fell onto the ground. This is for the soldiers who died here in Godgrave, fighting in your senseless war. Each and every one of them was a person, Anvil, not a statistic. None of them had to die. Though I doubt that a monster like you would care. Anvil did not react to losing a hand and instead staggered back in an attempt to retreat. But there was no escape from Sunny. The black odachi bit deep into Anvil's thigh, leaving a dreadful wound on it. More blood splattered onto the surface of the ancient bone. This is for Nephis, whose childhood you destroyed. You cruel, vicious thug, did you have fun tormenting a child? Taste some torment from me, then. Gritting his teeth, Sunny kicked Anvil in the wounded thigh and watched him fall to his knees. A rain of swords plummeted from the sky to destroy Sunny, but a great wave of shadows rose from the ground and turned into an impregnable wall, preventing them from interrupting him. He took a deep breath. And this is for me. This is for all the suffering I had to go through because of you, and others like you. Many things had changed about him, but one of them remained the same. Sunny never forgot his grudges. Looking at the kneeling king with cold contempt, he raised his odachi and prepared to deliver the final strike. For the first time, a clear emotion ignited in Anvil's eyes. Anger, reluctance, despair. He struggled to stand up, blood flowing down his mangled armor. You can't kill me, Nephis, she is the one who. Sunny struck down without waiting to hear the rest. The black blade of his serpentine odachi passed through the king's neck without meeting much resistance, and a severed head rolled to the ground. The iron crown slipped off and fell onto the bloodied bone with a rattle. Anvil's body swayed, and then toppled heavily in the clangor of steel. Far above, all of the remaining swords dissolved into a storm of sparks, and for a moment, it seemed as if the sky was aflame with scarlet light. It was really a breathtaking sight. Looking at it, Sunny could not help but remember the crimson tapestry of polar lights above Antarctica. As the sparks disappeared, he took a deep sigh and closed his eyes. A few moments later, Sunny said quietly, "Find peace within me, even if it's more than you deserve, bastard." This was the mercy of Shadow. Chapter 2258, Regicide. Far away, the colossal vessel of the Queen crumbled, its flesh burned away by the furious mass of white flames. The river of blood that had been contained within it boiled as it escaped. A billowing, scorching cloud of crimson vapor obscured the world, and in that haze, the flames condensed to form a beautiful figure. She seemed to be woven out of pure radiance, her silhouette both vague and blinding. Her incandescent sword fell without mercy, parting the river of blood. A sound that resembled both the murmur of a vast sea and an agonized groan rolled over the fractured battlefield. Hundreds of puppets were severed, and countless more turned to ash. Nephis pursued her enemy, her sword and her will relentless. An enemy like her was a fearsome obstacle for the queen. After all, the queen held authority over blood and decay, while Nephis possessed no blood in her transcendent form, and could resist decay with her flames. Her soul was still susceptible to the insidious influence of Ki Song's aspect, but thanks to the blessing, her power only grew in proportion to how badly her soul was damaged. That is why Nephis had chosen to fight Ki Song, the stronger of the two sovereigns, while relying on Sunny to face Anvil. That was why she was winning. She was going to kill the queen soon. How strange. Even focused entirely on the battle, Nephis found herself distracted by the reality of what was transpiring. She had spent most of her life waiting for this moment. Waiting for revenge. From the moment the immortal Flame clan fell into neglect and obscurity until now, she always knew that she would kill the traitors who had ruined her family one day. Her hatred of the sovereigns did not originate from one source, from one fateful injustice. Instead, it was born from 1,000 unforgivable grievances that she had endured growing up. The hideous trauma of the violence perpetrated against her as a child, the deaths of the loyal servants who had chosen to remain with the falling clan despite the danger, the subtle look of defeat and despair that appeared on her grandmother's stoic face from time to time, when she thought that no one was watching. All of this and more. So much more. That was why Nephis had expected to feel a storm of emotions when the day of her vengeance finally came. An unbearably bitter, but indescribable sweet feeling of bloodthirsty glee, a fury beyond anything she could ever imagine. But now that her goal was so close, she found herself feeling surprisingly little. It was partially, mostly, perhaps, because her feelings had been burned away by the cleansing ruthlessness of her flaw. But it was also because killing the sovereigns had never really been her true goal. The sovereigns, odious as they had become, were merely a symptom of the larger curse that plagued the world. The world itself was the problem. The children who died in the throes of the first nightmare. The adults who grew up to become callous and heartless, twisted by the fear of falling asleep. The nightmare gates that opened near parks and schools, the frenzied monster that roamed the streets looking for prey. The incalculable loss and sorrow that countless people felt every day. The nightmare spell. The sovereigns might have killed her father and obliterated her clan, but it was the nightmare spell that had created the sovereigns. It was also the nightmare spell that had taken her mother and grandfather away along with an entire continent. That was what Nephis had once believed, at least. Now, she wasn't even sure if the nightmare spell was the cause, or merely another symptom. In any case, disposing of the sovereigns was just a stepping stone to reaching her true goal. She was not a trembling child to whom the three supremes were like unfathomable monsters anymore, Ra knew OES. She had outgrown them. Still, Nephis had hoped to feel something, at least. If not for her own sake, then at least for her father's. But reality was cruel. Just like Nephis was cruel. As her searing sword cut the river of blood, annihilating some of it, the number of puppets continued to dwindle. Until there was none left. And then, the moment she was wary of came. Far away, in the midst of the great unified army, Cassie staggered and screamed. Then, her flesh started to blacken, as if it was being burned from the inside. Nephis could not see it, of course, because of the distance separating them, but she could feel her friend's desire for relief from the terrible agony through the connection they shared due to her domain. As Cassie burned, her crumbling body was enveloped by a beautiful white radiance and healed. Only to be burned again the next time Nephis brought her sword down on the dwindling river of blood. And as her delicate body was destroyed and rebuilt, a tiny drop of the queen's blood coursing through her veins, mixed with her own, was annihilated, a tiny drop, but not all of it by far. The queen spoke to her then. Don't you feel pity for your friend? Did she? Nephis wasn't sure that she did. That she was capable of feeling anything, anymore. But then, finally, an emotion came. It was not fury, not bloodlust, and not the dark glee of being close to exacting her vengeance. Instead, it was compassion. It was concern and worry for her friend. It was also relief of being able to feel anything at all. Nefis did not seem to have lost all of her humanity, in the end. Perhaps her efforts to ground herself in human things and passion had not been in vain, after all. I'm sorry, Cassie. Descending upon the queen in a storm of flame, Nefis continued to cause her friend indescribable pain and heal her. Can you feel it, Queen Song? Your daughters have turned their backs on you. Your callousness has driven even them away, and now, they are a part of my domain. It wasn't all of them, just yet. But Sation was the key. With her choosing her sisters over her mother, Moonveil had followed, Beastmaster, as well. The rest would fall behind their eldest sister, too. Boiling and seething, the greatly diminished river of blood rippled and coalesced into a human figure. Kisong looked at Nefis, a pale smile illuminating her beautiful face. Are you saying this to shake my resolve? Nefis shook her head. I just want to see if you care about them at all. The blessing lashed out once again, scorching the ancient bone and forcing Kisong to retreat. Beastmaster was barely alive when I healed her. Moonveil was dying. She would have been dead by now, if not for me. Their mother led them to their deaths, while their enemy saved them. Isn't that ironic? Even as we speak, my flames are permeating them, granting them power. However, her voice grew cold. My flames can both create and destroy. Now that they are a part of my domain, do you think I can burn them to ash, instead? Shall we see? The smile on Kisong's face turned brittle. Are you threatening to kill my daughters, Nefis? Instead of answering, Nefis lunged forward and pierced her with the incandescent blade of the blessing. Far away, a terrible wound opened on Cassie's chest, and she fell to her knees, her flesh being burned and blackened, then mended by the white flames. Nefis felt a new emotion. It was anguish. This battle of theirs was going to end soon. She said calmly, "No, I am promising to keep them alive. As long as you don't retreat from this battlefield until one of us is dead." The queen had to have other puppets hidden in secretive places. Even if Kai had managed to destroy those that had been left in Ravenheart, there would have been more elsewhere. And since any of them could serve as Kisong's primary vessel, the only way to kill her was to make sure that she chose to fight to her death. The only weakness the queen had was her daughters. Her love for them, no matter how twisted, was her flaw. And Nefis was not above using that flaw to destroy her. Kisong raised a hand and grasped the scorching blade of the blessing, looking at the beautiful spirit of light in front of her with her eerie dead eyes. Do you think you can kill me here, Nefis? Nefis channeled her flames through the blessing, knowing that Cassie was screaming somewhere far away. Did you think that you could kill my father? As Kisong pulled her closer and thrust her pale hand into the incinerating radiance of Nef's transcendent form, shredding her soul with her will, Nefis asked evenly. Did you think that you could destroy the immortal Flame Clan? The two of them stood still, ravaging each other. Did you think that the end justified the means? That all your sins would be forgiven, as long as you had won? There was one more emotion, now. A strange, childish sense of hurt and resentment. Then why didn't you win? If only you had won, then I wouldn't have to. I wouldn't be suffering all this pain because of you. Somewhere far away, the last of the queen's blood evaporated from Cassie's veins. The blind seer curled on the ground, shuddering, tears streaming down her blackened face. Moments later, the soft radiance erased the terrible burns, restoring her exquisite beauty. But the echoes of pain in her eyes remained. Kisong slowly shook her head, her smile slowly crumbling. You don't even know what you are unleashing, child. And then, she burned and burned, disappearing into the merciless flames. But until the very end, she did not retreat. That was how Kisong, the Raven Queen, died. Chapter 2259, Triumph. Sunny stood above Anvil's corpse, looking silently into the distance. The battlefield had grown eerily quiet, at some point. The storm of swords was gone. The sea of dead puppets had been eradicated, as well. Now, his shadows were finishing off the remaining nightmare. Creatures of the jungle, and the few great ones whom he had brought here himself, as well. The battle was all but over. And with it, the war was all but over too. A deep sigh escaped from his lips. The sovereigns, are no more. Well, two of them were no more, at least. The third one still remained somewhere out there, shrouded in mystery. But that was a problem for another day. Come to think of it, we are the sovereigns now, instead. Sunny could not quite fathom that everything had ended just like that. He had been preparing for this battle for close to 2 years. Nefis and Cassie had been building up to this moment for much longer, still. The threat of the sovereigns had been so oppressive, and had ruled their every breathing moment for so long, that it was hard to accept the fact that it was all over. But maybe that was the point. After all, the very reason they had conspired to eliminate the sovereigns was that the sovereigns were incompetent. Despite their great accomplishments, Anvil and Qi Song had been inadequate in front of the dire trials facing humanity today. They had been a titan with feet of clay. The King of Swords, that madman, had even wanted to die, at least that was the feeling Sunny got there, at the last moments. Granted, Anvil had wanted to die in a different way. The road to supremacy had been long and arduous, but the battle itself was swift and decisive. It was a triumph. But, when did it all go wrong for them? And would the same happen to him and Nefis? Surely, not. If for no other reason than that they already had a bitter example of what not to do. We've won. Sunny finally realized that unbelievable fact. Unlikely as it was, their conspiracy had achieved its goal. The tyrants were gone, and he and Nefis were perfectly poised to usurp their thrones. There was just one problem. As he stood without movement, there was a rustle of wings, and Nefis landed on the ground behind him. She had assumed her human form once again, the fiery radiance of her true self only betrayed by the blinding white radiance burning in her eyes. Rnobe circumflex. Her face was still and expressionless, devoid of any emotion. She must have lost the ability to feel once again. Perhaps she had lost more than ever before, having undergone the terrible trial of attaining supremacy in the incandescent white abyss of the merciless sky above Godgrave. She looked at Anvil's corpse, not showing any particular reaction. After a while, Nefis said, "Somehow, I imagined that I would be the one to kill him." Sunny had imagined the same, as well. He had even considered leaving the King of Swords alive for a bit longer to let Nefis find closure by confronting him one last time. For the first time, really. She had never faced Anvil, her father's killer, without a veil of deceit hiding her true feelings before. And now, she never would. There was little closure to find on this ravaged battlefield, today. If there was, it would have been neither Sunny nor Nefis who killed the king. It would have been his son, Mordred, instead. Actually, Sunny was quite surprised that Mordred had not shown up until the very end. He had been completely sure that the Prince of Nothing would pull some stunt or another during the battle. Perhaps something went wrong in True Bastion, preventing Mordred from playing his carefully prepared cards. Granted, he must not have expected to be forced to fight a cursed demon today. Sunny sighed. Killing him was easier than I had expected. Nefis turned to him and remained silent for a few moments. Maybe it was because he was already dead, where it counts. You would not know, because you have not spent a lot of time around hollows, but looking into his eyes felt like looking into my mother's eyes, sometimes. It was an eerie feeling. Sunny lingered a bit, then asked, "What about the Queen?" Nefis answered evenly. The Queen was fierce. The Queen was powerful. She fought until the very end. Her radiant eyes dimmed slightly. But she had a weakness, and because of that weakness, she was undone. So Qi Song is dead too, then. It was really all over. They had succeeded. Things went better than he had expected. They went almost exactly as he had hoped. Almost. Sunny smiled darkly. Are you wondering if you have a weakness, as well? Nefis tilted her head a little, looking at him with her expressionless gaze. Everyone has a weakness, Sunny. I have a couple, myself. He nodded. How do you feel? The sovereigns are dead. Your family is avenged. You must have waited for this moment for so long, and now it's here. She lingered for a bit. I don't feel much of anything, really, yet. I think I will feel more later. For now, I am simply content. A hard task is over. More arduous tasks are to come. Sunny sighed, then took a step back. There were so many things they had to do, so many things they had to discuss. Before it all, he wanted to simply embrace her, hold her, and kiss her. To share the joy of their victory with her, even if Nefis wasn't capable of feeling that joy just yet. But, he was not destined to feel the soft touch of her lips today. Instead, he felt the cold touch of Weaver's mask as it settled on his face. Raising his black odachi, Sunny smiled bitterly and said in a cold, emotionless tone. It's time for you to die, then, changing star. Far away, His dark legion had already slaughtered the remaining abominations. The shadows did not retreat back into his soul, however. Instead, they surrounded the two battered armies, looking at the soldiers in eerie silence. The human shadows raised their weapons, the monstrous shadows bared their fangs. Nephis frowned. What is this? Sunny let out a disdainful laugh. It's betrayal, my lady. I would have asked for forgiveness, but really, it's your own fault. Has no one ever told you not to trust a man whose loyalty can be bought? Chapter 2260, Peace. Neither the sword domain nor the song domain had won the war. Instead, both of them ceased to exist. Sunny and Nephis had won the war instead. Changing Star was destined to become the new sovereign of humanity. However, the Lord of Shadows could not stand by her side. Because he was the fateless heir of Weaver, the demon of fate. Simply disappearing into obscurity was not going to work, either. Anvil and Ki Song were able to hide their existence because they had become supreme in the darkness of the underworld, unwitnessed by anyone. Sunny, however, attained supremacy in the most flamboyant fashion. He became supreme in front of hundreds of thousands of awakened warriors, summoning a legion of shadows to save them from the flood abominations and slaying the King of Swords in full view of everyone who had the ability to see. So, there was only one solution. The Lord of Shadows had to die. And he could not simply die, either, since that could potentially turn him into a revered martyr. He had to waste all the goodwill he had earned first. Far away, the soldiers grew tense as they looked at the legion of silent shadows that now faced them, ready to attack. Some gazed into the distance, as well, where the Lord of Shadows was pointing his dark sword at Changing Star. Their eyes were wide with shock, and their faces were pale. But the soft radiance still illuminated their souls and their bodies, so they were not afraid. Many gritted their teeth, grasping the hilts of the weapons tighter. Sunny stared at Nephis from below Weaver's mask and sneered. Changing Star, you are surprisingly naive for someone so exceptionally strong. But then again, you are so righteous and benevolent, disgusting, really. Did you really think that I would share the throne of humanity with someone, anyone, when I can sit on it alone? He took a step forward. Anvil and Ki Song had the right idea, you know. There can only be one person wearing the crown. They had the right idea, but what could I do? I wanted to be that person. I could not kill them both myself, though, so I needed to use someone gullible as a distraction. Sunny chuckled. So I used you. And now, I have no use for you anymore. Nephis pursed her lips, looking at him calmly. A few seconds later, she asked. So it was all a lie. Sunny laughed. Of course. Did you think I enjoyed being treated as your toy? Did you think I wanted to spend time in your company? I hated every minute of it. Seducing you was surprisingly easy, but enduring the burden of your naive infatuation was an unpleasant chore. Abs. She tilted her head, then sighed and raised the blessing. I see. So it was like that, then. I understand. No, maybe I don't. But you were right. I should not have trusted you. Her eyes shone with blinding radiance, and she said in an even tone. I think I will feel hurt by your betrayal, later. Maybe I will even be hurt by having killed you. So, I should hurry up and kill you soon. Sunny smiled bitterly behind Weaver's mask. The two of them looked at each other, the air practically crackling with tension at the point where their gazes met. For a few moments, the entire world seemed to stand still, and the pressure continued to build until it became crushing. The shadows stirred, growing deeper and deeper. The blade of the blessing shone with radiant light, chasing the shadows away and illuminating the two supremes as they prepared for battle. Then, in the blink of an eye, both Sunny and Nephis lunged forward. There was a flash of light, and a thunderous thunderclap. And when the light dimmed, the soldiers saw the Lord of Shadows kneeling on the ground, Changing Star's blade buried in his chest. Sunny groaned, struggling to grasp its blade. Looking down at him, Nephis spoke solemnly. 3 supreme warriors of humanity died today. Ah, what a waste. A heavy sigh escaped from her lips. And at the same time, Cassie's voice resounded in Sunny's head. Nephis says not to be so dramatic. You're not really hurt. Sunny shuddered, still pretending to be in pain. The blessing was indeed buried in his chest, but the area around the supposed wound had turned into an intangible shadow just before it hit, so he was not wounded. It was still a bit painful, but since Nefis had not put any killing intent into her strike, his soul was mostly intact. Well, tell her to act her part better. Wait, no, actually, never mind. Tell her she did well. Nefis was not known for her acting skills. She was doing her best. For a few moments back there, Sunny had wanted to reenact their vicious battle in the Crimson Spire. He had imagined losing the fight, then hearing Nefis ask why he allowed her to win in a trembling voice. But then he realized that there was no need to deceive her into making it seem like she killed him. He could just ask. So, he had told what needed to happen to Cassie, who relayed it to Nefis. And as a result, the Lord of Shadows was dying now. She says that you owe us a good explanation later. Sunny forced out a smile. I'll try. Would he even be able to explain? Probably yes, with some trouble. She trusts me enough to go along without asking why is this so sweet? With that, Sunny pretended to convulse. And then dissolved into shadows. At the same moment, his dark legion disappeared, as well, returning into his soul. Nefis was left standing alone, like a sole island of light in the ocean of darkness. Victorious. The long war was over. Some days later, a towering dream gate opened in the clear sky above Bastion, and the stunning silhouette of the Ivory Island slowly emerged from it, drifting among the clouds to hover high above the great castle. Millions of people had gathered on the streets of the city to watch the triumphant return of Changing Star, the last daughter of the immortal Flame clan. The new ruler of humanity. High above them, Nefis was looking down at the familiar sight of the sprawling city that had grown on the shores of Mirror Lake. Then, with a sigh, she turned away and left the balcony. Descending the stairs, she walked through the corridors of the ivory tower and entered a spacious room. There, a stunning woman sat in a wheelchair, positioned in front of the window. Her face was emotionless, and her gaze was strangely hollow, as if she was not there at all. Placing a vase with fresh flowers on the table near the bed, Nefis walked over to the window, leaned against the windowsill, and looked at the woman quietly. She did not speak for a while, then sighed. Hi, Mom. I am sorry if you are uncomfortable, it's just that it's difficult for me to come to NQSC these days. And I don't know how much longer it will be safe for you to remain there. So, I asked Cassie to bring you here. Nefis lingered for a few moments. I am supreme now. And I avenged Dad. His killers are in the grave, well, 2 of them are, at least. A shadow suddenly ran across her face. Oh, right, you wouldn't know, for you, they would have been your friends, still. In that case, I am sorry. Your friends have passed away. Then, she smiled awkwardly. By the way, I guess I have a boyfriend now. He is very handsome. I'm sure you would have liked him. Oh, but things are a bit complicated between us at the moment. Things are complicated in general. With a sigh, she looked in the window and said wistfully. Our world is being consumed by the dream realm. There's so much to be done before it is swallowed entirely. I am terribly busy, and he is too. She looked at the woman and smiled. We need to become gods, after all. With that, Nefis inhaled deeply and headed for the door. She did not know how much time they had left, but it was probably not as much as they hoped. Somewhere far away, a desolate land lay under a starless sky, shrouded in eternal darkness. There was a colossal crater at the heart of that land, and on its edge, a dark city stood, empty and forlorn. Nothing moved in that city. Until, suddenly, a magnificent black temple appeared there, as if it had stood in the darkness all along. Soon enough, 2 figures emerged from the temple. One of them was a young man with pale skin, wearing a simple black tunic. The other was a petite woman who floated a few centimeters above the ground, with a grim expression on her face. Looking around, Aiko shook her head in disbelief. Gods. I really never thought I'd ever return to this hellhole. Hey, boss, do we really need to be here? Sunny looked at her and shrugged. There's almost no nightmare creatures here anymore. It's one of the safest places in the dream realm, really, plus, can't you see in the darkness? What are you so angry about? Aiko stared at him with indignation. What am I angry about? My job. I'm jobless again. All the effort I spent on building the brilliant Emporium brand, and my boss just had to go and become the most villainous scum of humanity. And then die. Couldn't you at least have the decency to stay dead after dying, huh, boss? Sunny coughed. Decency. What is that? Then, he patted the petite girl on the shoulder. Don't be sad though, Aiko. Do you think that war profiteering is all that? Let me tell you. He gestured to the dark, desolate streets. Colonialism. That's where the real money is at. And Forgotten Shore is a prime colony location. Sunny smiled. So, what do you say? Shall we build a city here? A peaceful city away from all the strife. It would stay peaceful for a bit, at least. End of Volume 9, Throne of War. The end. Your feedback is appreciated.